Ever since I was a kid, I wanted to work at Nintendo making video game consoles. I think I also wanted to be an astronaut, and sadly these things may never actually happen. But I did get to live out my dreams recently with a system that was sent in to us from a company called Clockwork. This is the Clockwork Pi, a build-it-yourself portable video game system. How does it work? How long does it take to put together? Well, let's find out. There are tons of emulation devices on the market, and we're no stranger to them, having covered many of them in the past on the show. Every device we've covered, though, has come pre-assembled, having been manufactured in a factory. But Clockwork is taking a completely different approach in how you interact with their product. The Clockwork Pi has a quad-core Cortex A7 CPU, with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth built right in, 1 gig of DDR3 RAM and a micro HDMI output so that you can actually get this thing to project images onto a TV. But it also comes with a screen, speakers, controls, and a rechargeable battery. The device runs off an operating system called Clockwork Pi OS, which is pre-installed on a 16 gig micro SD card that is also included in the box. This is an all-in-one solution and an interesting beginner's product for people wanting to get into the homebrew hardware scene, and it's been executed in a way that I have never seen before. But to start this journey, you're gonna need to build it first. The Clockwork Pi arrives in a package that includes all the components that you'll need to build a fully functional portable game console. When I first got the box, I assumed it'd be a lot like Lego, but it has more in common with a model kit than it does with any of those toy building blocks. All of the pieces are still in their original plastic frames from the plastic mold injection process. This means that you'll have to break the pieces apart and combine them to build each and every individual component required to assemble the device. The kit doesn't require a screwdriver or glue because all the pieces, once removed from the plastic grid, just snap together and fit perfectly. However, in my experience, I needed to use a sharp knife to shave down some of the plastic edges just to help make sure that the pieces fit together properly. This is similar to how a classic snap-together model kit works. It's very easy and has a nice visual guide that makes it simple to follow. The smart thing about the Clockwork Pi is that it has an outer shell that combines multiple smaller sections within it. Each smaller unit has a specific function, like the battery container, the main board, the screen, the speakers, and the controller module. Without the yellow console shell, you can combine all of these pieces together and still have a fully functional console. And that right here is what makes this product so unique. The whole process to build it takes about 2 hours if you're as slow as I am, but the time will vary for you, especially if you're more familiar with building model kits in the past. And I gotta be honest with you folks, building this was one of the most fun and satisfying things I have ever done on Rerez. Building this gave me a better understanding for the bones and structures that go into the console itself before I got to play it. And you're likely not going to feel the same way about this console as you will with anything else in your collection unless you happen to have built those yourself as well. And as an added perk with building your own system, if any of the components need to be upgraded or swapped out or repaired, it's incredibly simple to do because, well, you built it. You'll probably never need to send it away for repairs because you know the product inside and out. That's pretty cool. The only negative I can think of about this building process is that it's possible that someone might find this too complex. But I didn't, and believe me folks, I'm not that familiar with building your own consoles. But I personally think that assembling the console yourself is one of the leading reasons to get this kit over a pre-assembled unit. Simply because if you don't believe you're capable of doing something like this, you may find out, like me, that you actually can. But now that you have it assembled, what can you possibly do with this hardware? Like I mentioned earlier, the operating system is pre-installed, and that includes some preloaded games and software with a fairly simple and easy to navigate user interface. Because this is open source software, you can do virtually anything you want to do as long as you can code it yourself or find programs online that others have created. I could spend days listing off everything that this system is capable of doing. Your only real limits are with the hardware and your own capabilities. But here are a few things installed on the system that you can play right out of the box. You'll find a copy of OpenTyrian. This is an open source version of a classic DOS game and it runs great, almost exactly like you'd play it on DOS. You'll also find the original version of Cave Story in here, which runs pretty well, but in some instances it seems to be a little bit slower in just certain sections while you're playing it, but it is still totally playable. You'll also find Free Doom, an open source version of Doom that has none of the assets from the original games, but it also plays pretty well. And honestly, it's kind of fun to experience if you've never played it before. These games have been pre-configured to work on this specific device with controls already mapped with a pick up and play approach. One thing I've noticed while playing pretty much everything on the system is that once in a while I might accidentally hit the menu button because it's so close to the D-pad. Now this doesn't happen with every single game, but once in a while if you hit it, it will actually boot you back all the way to the main menu and it won't save your progress or anything like that or even give you a warning. But because it's open source, you could set up a warning to prevent that from happening, and you would need to code that though, and that's something I'm not really good at, but you could possibly wait for an update to give a safety exit option. While playing all of these games, I noticed that the D-pad also wasn't very good, lacking that strong central pivot that many retro gamers can't live without. The A, B, X, and Y buttons are very responsive, but they're also a little loose. Included in the kit is a secondary backplate for the console shell. This has an Arduino output slot with wires and an additional key grid, both of which can be used for other functions, but I believe most gamers won't really see a benefit in using these things, unless you want to use the key grid for additional shoulder buttons. Everything is interchangeable and can be mixed around as you see fit because, like we mentioned a bunch of times already, you built this thing yourself. But clearly, the reason to own the Clockwork Pi is for the ability to emulate older games. This is made obvious through the system's pre-installed selection of emulators like MAME and others that run ROMs from Gameboy, NES, and even the original PlayStation. I mean, look at it! It looks like a Game Boy for a reason. Your mileage with these emulators may vary, and while we were able to run most Game Boy, Game Boy Color, NES, and even Game Boy Advance titles, there were a couple that seemed to have some issues. The majority of MAME titles and PlayStation 1 games we attempted to run didn't really start up, and even the ones that did weren't really perfect. Whether it be low frame rate, poor audio quality, or even screen tearing, we noticed a number of issues running almost every single game that we could throw at this thing. And while Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and NES games were running a lot better, they did suffer from these issues, although they were far more minor and not as noticeable. And while we could start up virtually any Game Boy Advance game, I would have to say that every single one of them was just running a lot slower than they should be. But all of this is open source, and software is being updated constantly from the community and the creators themselves to make use of all the hardware inside this device. There's also a copy of RetroArch included that's loaded into the system, which for those of you that don't know is an emulator powerhouse capable of running tons of different emulator cores and playing thousands of different games. Keep in mind though, you are limited to what consoles you can play based off of how many buttons are on this device, or which ones you're basically allowed to modify. It's not incredibly complex to use, but loading the ROMs onto the Clockwork Pi is a whole other story. In order to access the file structure of the device, you have to connect it in a bizarre way that's basically like connecting to a file server. It's not as easy as just plugging in a USB cord to your computer and dragging and dropping files. And because the main board, once assembled in the game shell, hides the microSD card slot, you won't have the ability to just take it out whenever you want unless you're willing to disassemble the entire unit just to access that card. But even if you could access that card, the file structure may not be readable or accessible depending on the operating system that you're using, and that may require more additional work. So it makes the idea of loading this with files not impossible, but probably more complex than you'd likely assume. I personally ran into several issues trying to transfer files. Every connectivity method accessible to me had a drawback or issue that, while solvable, added more time in which I was attempting to fix things rather than enjoying playing games on the device. And that is exactly what is so problematic with the Clockwork Pi. It's not an easy, quick solution for portable gaming on the go. It's very technical and can be too advanced for some entry-level gamers. But if you're a more advanced user, this is going to be a dream system. You can code things and easily configure anything you might like, and you'll be able to 3D print your own parts and make new shells or components, while retaining the relative simplicity of the internal structure of the hardware. Like I mentioned earlier, this is a great start for anyone trying to get into the homebrew console design scene, and you don't have to be an electrical engineer to use the parts that are provided in this kit, and for many, that could be a limiting factor for them wanting to design their own system. However, for the average consumer, there are a lot of faults here, mostly in software, that are rather unfortunate. I don't think it would have been too demanding to have a solid and reliable collection of emulators preloaded onto the system that worked better than the ones already installed. And while you can switch them out and even update the ones that are pre-installed, it might be a very difficult thing for your average consumer to achieve. After they build it, they might just be limited to playing the included open source games on the device. There are plenty of things to do with Clockwork Pi, but I personally would have liked to see a lot more included and pre-installed into the system. This would have made it easy to recommend to people that are looking for the experience of building their own device, but were rewarded right away with a reasonable library of things to do that didn't need to be tinkered around with or installed through updates and stuff like that. Something that would have just been built and good to go. But even some of the more basic features like the video output really highlight some of the issues with the software, as virtually nothing runs well being output to a monitor. Games run slow or they run in a very small window in the center of the screen, and there's also a cursor in the direct middle of the screen at all times. But as always, this could improve with further software updates, but as of this recording, even playing NES games on full screen was a terrible experience. This is just something that shouldn't be an issue in a product like this that's already being sold to consumers. At its core though, what the Clockwork Pi represents is a good idea that should be further explored, and if this company sees enough success with this product, I have no doubt that they will make bigger and better kits in the future. And for any issue that we've been having with the software, the community of open source programmers out there will likely get their hands on this and fix any of the issues that we've had. Or if you're good enough, you can just do it yourself. If you're looking for a product that's going to lead your hand and tell you exactly what you need to do step by step, this probably isn't what you're looking for, because this really is a hardware tool for people out there that really want to tinker around with the hardware and the software. But if you are into that market and you really want to have something that's completely and endlessly customizable, look no further than the Clockwork Pi.